Alright, I guess people can start watching as they join in, but I'm going to go ahead and get started on this thing. So, welcome to Bad Wolf Props. I'm Andrew, and this is Bad Wolf Props. I'm going to go ahead and bring over the project for today. Of course, I'm not going to get through the whole thing in one sitting. That would just be ludicrous. But here we have the Hulk. And this is about 16 inches or so. I have to measure it again. I have a tape measure right here. Let's see. Well, top to bottom here is almost 18, but the Hulk himself is about 16 or so. So I did just some test videos yesterday and showed a little bit of the process that I started here on the knee. I'm going to do the same thing today and show you the process that I went through last night and work on finishing it. So here we go. So first things first, I'm going to take him off his base. And I did do some gluing on him previously, many months ago, I guess. But if you can see, there's these seams that have just a little bit of a gap to them yet. That's what we're going to start with. We're going to start with fixing the gaps. So we're going to start with super glue. I've seen a lot of people use super glue, and I've seen a lot of people use different kinds, different styles, different brands. A lot of it's personal preference. I use Gorilla Glue Super Glue Gel. I like the gel just because it's easier to work with. It doesn't run. It allows you to shape it a little bit, I guess you'd say. It works especially well when doing these seams. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put just a tiny little bit into the seam. I'm going to squeeze it in there as much as I can without really making big globs on the outside. And this stuff has a decent work time, but you do have to work fairly quick. So, I always put my cap back on when I'm not using it. And I always use a piece of cardboard, not paper towel, not toilet paper or anything really thin like that. You want something at least as thick as cardboard, and you take it and you just wipe it flat over the seam. Go lengthwise with the seam, and you're going to wipe off basically all the excess so that you don't have a bunch of that sticking out. And you can actually, if you get a lot of extra on there, you can just carry that over and kind of smush it into another seam section if you need. The goal is not to have globs of glue. You want everything to be flush and flat. You can do that. It makes it a lot easier to make this look good. It makes it a lot easier to sand. So, now that we've put it into the seam, we want to cure it. We want to cure it with something that's going to work pretty quick. This is baking soda powder. A lot of people use accelerants like Zap-A-Gap or Insta, whatever, solvent-based agents. This is just baking soda powder, and it actually works better because it doesn't stink, for one, but it actually strengthens the bond instead of making it brittle, where the other ones tend to make things a little more brittle rather than stronger. They will cure it, and this will cure it just as fast, but this actually absorbs into the glue a little bit and gives it some strength. You can actually use this to build up layers if you need to. You just sprinkle it on and rub it in like I did there. Move on to the next section. Well, that's cured on the surface. It does sometimes, depending on your gap, take a little bit to get all the way in there. So, we'll move on to the next section. There's my cardboard. Smooth it out. Always smooth it out so you don't end up curing it with a giant bubble that you have to try to smooth out. That's just not fun. Alright, there we go. That is ready for some baking powder soda there. Or baking soda powder. I don't know how exactly you want to say it. But I can touch that and I don't end up with a bunch of stuff on my fingers. Let's see if I can bring in some more light. See if that'll help. That one might be a bit bright. This is the first real test of this setup, so might take a bit of getting used to here. That looks a little better. Just had to move it back a bit. I'm going to take any of the excess that I can and dump it back in the bag so I'm not wasting a bunch. And I've pretty much gone around that whole thing and it's ready to be wiped down. You can wipe it down with your fingers or you can wipe it down with a cloth. I always keep little shreds of shirt around and just wipe it off. This helps get all that dust off of there, all the particles. And you can actually go back over and do it a second time if you need to, if you need to build that up a little bit more. And now I'm going to try out a new tool that I picked up today. I tried it out a little bit earlier as well, and I really, really liked it. So I'm going to use it for some of this here for doing cleanup. And this is a super cheap, I actually picked it up at Menards for $1. It was on sale. Electric engraver that is cordless. $1. Can't beat it, so I picked up 2, but I think after using it I might pick up a whole bunch more just to have spares sitting around. I can keep them in my different kits. So it literally has a little button on here and spins what's basically a Dremel tip. It's one of the little metal Dremel tips. And this one is just a little ball. I'm not sure if you can even see that, but it's just a tiny little ball. And it's abrasive. So as it spins, it takes off little bits of whatever you're using it on. It's supposed to be for engraving, but it works really well on Pet G. This is Pet G. So I'm going to start out where I had a little bit of trim piece here that I forgot to get off, and I'm going to use this to kind of get it without messing anything up because it's really precise. And I think it works a little bit better than using a Dremel because it's so tiny. It's really easy to manipulate and it doesn't spin all that fast. I'm just taking off tiny little bits, ever so slightly. Okay. I wish I could zoom this in a little bit better for you, but it probably won't focus. You can just barely see there's this little piece. It's actually flashing that in my hurry to get this thing just set up at one point, I had left it on there. Usually I try to take all that off beforehand. And this is working really well. Actually curled it back a little bit, which is great because I can grab it and peel it. There's just a tiny little bit left over here. And great for those hard to sand spots. I can actually get in underneath this little shred of clothing that's part of the model and get to the spots I need to sand. And I'm just working this in small, tiny little circles so that I'm not gouging anything. Alright, and there's another spot down here that's going to be hard to get to, so I'll use this again. And you can see it stops the spin every once in a while because this thing isn't super strong, but that's alright. So it's gotten into the really hard to reach spots. I'm going to take a knife in here and get some of the easier spots because it works a lot faster. There we go. And this isn't something I would normally have to work on cleaning up, is this extra flashing, because usually I just take that off beforehand. I never really intended to finish this Hulk, but I thought it would be a good one to try out for videos. This is just a green PETG filament from Hatchbox. And it printed pretty good. 0.2mm layer height. Most of it was printed on a machine that I designed and built. So, sorry I can't really plug anybody's printers. Just cleaning up a few more little stragglers here. Alright, so we pretty much went all the way around this seam, and it's time to start using some sandpaper. Now you can pick up normal sandpaper like this at the store, and it's okay for this kind of work, but it's not fantastic. I much prefer, let me grab some out of my bag here, emery cloth, and this comes on a roll. I've got some longer pieces here. You see, it literally just comes on a roll. And the paper that it's on is much softer. It's a lot easier to work with and fold and get into little places. Much easier than the thick stuff that you pick up at the store. But if you pick up emery cloth, it's like what you would use on like metal turning lathes. This stuff is actually a lot better for being able to work into these little areas and all that. Oh hey, we got some people watching. Ben, Jim. Alright, so I'll recap just a little bit. This Hulk here is about 16 inches tall, and he's made up of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces. There's another video of me actually doing the printing for this on my big custom printer. It's a time-lapse video on the same Bad Wolf Props YouTube channel, so you can watch that if you like. This is all printed in PETG. I like PETG because it sands so much nicer, and it's got a little bit of softness to it. But it's flexible. It's great material, and it prints really well. Love it. So that's what this Hulk is. And I had started doing a little bit of finishing work on a previous video here just to show what you can do. And so far in this one, I've just gone around this seam and done the gluing and a little tiny bit of cleanup. I'm going to go on to the next seam and show that process again. So I'm using super glue gel. This is Gorilla Glue brand. And I like the gel. It just works so much easier and cleaner and doesn't run like the other stuff. So I'm just going to squeeze a tiny little bit into a seam. Just going all the way down. And you don't want to do too much at a time, just because it is super glue. It does dry pretty quick, but the gel gives you a little bit of work time. And I've got a piece of cardboard here that I'm going to run across the seam as flat as I can, and even press down a little bit. I'm using this instead of a cloth or toilet paper, or even I don't know, anything thin. You don't want to use thin. You want something thick like cardboard. All right, so all I've done, smooth it out so there's no globs at all. You want this to be as smooth as you can get it. Then we're going to come back through and cure it with baking soda powder. This adds strength. It doesn't stink like the other solvent-based stuff. It doesn't make it brittle like the other stuff does. So this is my go-to. And I just sprinkle it on and kind of work it in. And my fingers stay clean, because once this hits it, it doesn't come off on your fingers. So that seam is glued. And you can use a cloth to just wipe off the excess powder. Like that. And that acts as a filler. It strengthens your seam. And that is actually ready to put Bondo on if we want to, or glazing putty actually. But we're going to keep going around the seam here a little bit more. Chat's going on. All right. Yep, it's pretty much the in between PLA and ABS. It's beautiful stuff. I love it. For the first time ever, the other day, I decided I'd go ahead and print something in PLA. I've been printing ABS for many years, and I've switched over to PETG about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, something like that. And I will never go back to ABS. And like I said, I just printed some PLA the other day, just for a special project. So that seam is covered. Lost my cap. There it is. Smooth that with the cardboard and sprinkle more powder. real good in there. All right. And that's going to sand really well. All right, so his midsection, I think there's only one little area left that I haven't got to. And if you needed to, you can always go back over this whole thing and build up your layers if you had a really big gap. I chose the shirt special for this project. It's actually the first time wearing this shirt. It was a little bit chilly down here and I needed something appropriate to wear. There we have his midsection is completely glued. And since I've got you guys here, I can do a little bit of the next part of this, like I did on the first leg here. And I'm going to use glazing putty. This is Bondo brand glazing putty. Elmer's Pro Strength Wood Fill. I've heard of that stuff. I've not actually used it yet. Thought about trying it. I usually, depends on what I'm doing. If I need to fill a gap for strength, I'm going to use the method of using the super glue in small little swaths and putting the powder on it, because it does add a lot of strength to it. I'm not sure how much strength the wood putty is going to give, but it sounds like it'd be fun to try it. I might have to pick some of that up for another video. I'll remember that. So, actually, before I start using this, I do want to hit a little bit of sandpaper on here and clean up this this seam. There it is. So this is 80 grit sandpaper, emery cloth. I'm going to start by just going against the grains. Now 80 grit is actually enough that you can remove all of the print lines if you wanted to with it, but it's going to take a long time. But with Pet G, it really works well. So I'm just knocking off some of the big stuff. There was a weird funky line there. There's some little zits. And just making sure I go across the seam. $2,000 grit sandpaper. Depending on what it is, I've gone for almost mirror finishes on some things and done wet sanding on them. Some parts of my R2 have been wet sanded. Yeah, that's another reason I don't use PLA, is it really doesn't sand well. This does. Especially with this 80 grit. I saw some people trying 220 and 240 grit to start on the raw print, and that just takes forever. these are actually the little bit more difficult sections here. It's got the pants are frayed at the bottom in the model here, and it creates a little lip that I've got to sand underneath. So it'll take me a little bit of time to get underneath there. And that's where this emery cloth is great, because you can fold it much easier than standard sandpaper. It really gets in there, almost forms to it. At what speed do I normally print PETG? I have to look at the exact numbers. But it's is it 50 millimeters a second, I think. I'd have to look, because that might be the underspeed is 50%, not 50 millimeters. I have to look at my numbers again. Just kind of cleaning up a little bit of the area around it too. As with any print, there's always going to be some areas that don't quite meet up. So if you can sand them down to meet up, that's always great. If not, there's always glazing putty. And this emery cloth does hold up better than standard sandpaper as well. So as I drop it on the floor, it doesn't lose the grains off of it near as much. How's the audio and video for you guys? While you're answering, I'll answer your question. I usually use 2 or 3 layers for the walls. I'm using a 0.4 nozzle, so basically 2 or 3 of those layers. How far can I sand it down? I can actually use power sanders on here. Like I'm sanding in your room. All right. If I'm going to use a power sander, I will typically go for 3 layers. If I want to print something quick that I'm going to hand sand only, I can get away with 2 layers, no problem. And I do print everything at pretty much 0.2 millimeter layer heights with PETG. It actually does really well at that size. And I almost always use a 0.4 nozzle. Actually just about done going around the outside of this. At least for this one seam. the back of the leg here had some fairly rough spots because of how steep it was when it was printing. The leg itself sat at a really steep angle like that. So this underside here had to deal with all the printing almost in air, but it did okay. Same thing with the underneath here. There's a little bit of roughness to it, but we'll clean all that up. If you can see some of the white as it's spreading out here, that's just the excess powder and super glue mix. Like I said, it sands really well, so it doesn't take long. And I'm into a spot where I can't quite reach with the sandpaper, so I'm going to use this little tool again. I don't know if you guys saw it before, but this is what I picked up at Menards for $1. Little battery-powered electric engraver. It works great. It takes just 2 AA's. It has essentially, it's a Dremel tip to it. It's just a tiny little ball, little metal ball, and it spins when you push the button, but it's really easy to handle. I like this thing a lot. Picked it up at Menards for the first time today. Really glad I did. And I just work it in small little circles on here in order to get to some of these spots that are hard to sand. And don't press very hard. This was at Menards, not Harbor Freight, but I'm sure they probably have something like this too. I think for $1, I'm going to go pick up more of them. And it does. It gets in these little crevices. And takes off just enough material. It works really well with Pet G. And I did try it out on the glazing putty that had dried too. It works really well on that. It doesn't really gum it up. And you can use it to smooth down some of the bigger rough spots too. So I'm just checking for anything that I need to hit around this leg yet. More little zits right there. Check it with my fingers just to see if I missed anything major. That overhang that was just a little bit rough there. It sands down really well though. And some of this is a little bit too much for just sanding. I'd be sanding here forever. So I'll go back over that with the glazing putty a little extra. Alright, So I'll wipe that down. There's plenty more on the leg to work on, but I'm going to go ahead and get this glazing putty in place on the seam itself. So Bondo's glazing putty, it's the one that doesn't have the activator on it. It's already pre-mixed. You don't have to put anything extra with it, basically. So I'll take a little dab and smooth it over the seam. And try to leave it built up just enough that you don't see the seam after you've smoothed it out. If the seam is bad enough, you'll just go over it a second time. Or if you don't get it quite right, and that's alright. There we go. And where it comes off the side, I try to take my finger and just drag it away. Part of the technique, I guess, is just drag it away so you don't have these rough edges. It just kind of pulls it away from where you've been working and smooths it out. And if you've ever done any drywall work, it's kind of like that. You don't just put the putty at the seams, you feather it. You gotta feather it away. And that helps make sure you don't have any big globs and stuff too. Done that, I've pulled it away, and I'm going to keep going around the seam for now. Another little dab. And here's that really rough section where it had the massive overhang. I'm just going to kind of rub it in that whole section as I go. Blend it off, feather it, smooth it out best I can. And if you need to, this is another reason I really like this emery cloth, is you can use the back side of it because it's so smooth and soft. You can use that to kind of smooth things out if you need to, which helps for getting underneath this edge of the clothing there. It does need a little bit extra in there. And if you put too much, that's alright. Sometimes you have to put too much to really smooth it out, because then you're going to pull some of that back out of there. So that's what I just did underneath his little edge, is I put a little too much. And I'm going to use that little Dremel bit on there to take some of that back off in a bit. In the meantime, we'll keep going around. Just taking care of some of these rougher spots as well as the seam as I go. A lot of people will switch over to using the 2-in-1 filler primer, sandable primers. They'll switch over to that pretty quick and not use a whole lot of glazing putty. But I find the glazing putty is much easier to work with, and it doesn't gum up your sandpapers near as bad. So it lasts a lot longer, and it's a lot quicker to sand than the 2-in-1. So I'm going to take a piece of this emery cloth and fold it backwards. And use that to kind of pull out some of the extra. To give nice crisp lines on the pants there. There we go. And when I did that, it left a little bit of excess as it pushed it away. That's alright, because that'll knock off of there really fast. How strong is the super glue bond? The super glue that I'm using, the gel, has a pretty decent bond to it. It bonds really well with PETG, but adding the baking soda powder makes it even better. I know I've read a lot that you shouldn't use super glues on PETG, but experience tells me that's just wrong. I've used it a lot. If you have a perfectly smooth surface of PETG, that would be correct. It doesn't bite on just the surface itself. You do need to give it a little bit of roughness, or if you're using it on a 3D printed part, you already have much of that roughness to it. And it seems to bond really well. I actually exclusively use the super glue on just about everything, especially when I cure it with the powder. Alright, so almost made it around, or did we? Looks like we made it all the way around. This stuff does kind of shrink up just a little bit, so just along the seam itself, I'm going to go and hit it with a second really, really light coating of the glazing powder, or the glazing putty. I'm getting myself tongue-tied already. Real light. When I put this on, I try to go as absolutely thin as I can, because you're going to take most of it off anyways. So the less you put on, the less you take off, and the quicker it dries. Now I will admit there are probably better things than super glue. Things that'll give it a better bond. Super glue is so cheap, so easy to get. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go and buy expensive stuff like Weld On and things like that, for me anyways, because this works so well. I've used Weld On products before. There's the little section I missed, hiding up underneath the main overhang. There we go. I'm going to use a piece of cardboard to get into that. Just a little smoothing. I was kind of painting it on there in that groove. There we go. While that leg is drying, I can do the same thing to the rest of the first knee that I did last night. So I think I've got a little bit more cleanup to do on it first. So I just did a small section. Yes, this will get a full paint job. I rarely leave a print in a raw form because it just looks so much better when it's fully painted. And I know some of you saw me working on Wally. That's the same deal here. This is raw print, which it's just taped together, so there's pretty massive seams. It's not actually fitted or anything like that yet. It's just taped together. But where you see those seams, let's see if I can give you the same view here. The seams are gone on this one completely. Just using the techniques that I'm using here. Started off with the super glue and baking powder, the baking soda powder, and moved on to the glazing putty. So you can see the same smoothness is gonna happen on Hulk. So we're gonna move on to some more sanding. And I need to find my 80 grit again. Here it is. And I will be doing a full video on the other Wally eye at some point here. This is kind of a practice run here with Hulk. But I will do a full video on the Wally eye. And I'll do that one in multi-stages. And after I get done doing the live videos for it, I'll take all that video and put it into a single short video with a bit of a how-to. So here you can see I've got the glazing putty from last night. I'm just kind of cleaning up the feathered edges first, blending in, and then work my way across the seam. And this one I had only done one pass with, so I know I'm going to have to put some more on it. And work my way to the other side. My goal is always to make it look like it's not even a printed part by the end of it. I want someone to say, "Oh my gosh, there's Wally," not, "Hey, look at that 3D printed Wally." But that's just personal preference. Now, when I'm sanding this glazing putty off, I mentioned before that you're going to take off most of what you put on. And you can see that I'm doing just that. There is almost no glazing putty left from the section that I just sanded, except for what is filling in the imperfections. But it sands off super fast, super easy, which is why I love it so much. For video editing, what do I have? Pinnacle, I think? And I've used it just a little bit. I'm not super great with it yet, but I've also used Windows Movie Maker, and I actually like that a lot. It's just really quick and easy. Joe Mike. We're having fun with the Hulk right now. I'm doing some sanding, some filling. Right now I'm cleaning up just a little bit of the knee that I started last night while the other one's drying. Cleaning up just a few little zips here on the section of the leg. That section where I'm cleaning up the zits, it's nice too because it cleans up all those print lines. It's a nice thing about PET G and 80 grit sandpaper, is that you can clean up the entire thing if you like, and it will take a while, but not near as long as PLA. One of these days I'll get around to doing a time study between just sanding or if I just coat the whole thing in glazing putty. And sand that. You know, how much more time do I save if I just coat the whole thing in glazing putty? Because sometimes that's what I do. It seems like it does move a little quicker. Alright. That little spot's cleaned up. Oh no, Joe cut off his beard. Seams are the worst part about the whole thing. And Joe gets to see my new tool now in action. This is the little engraving tool I picked up at Menards for $1. I'm going to use that to come into these real tight spaces I can't get to otherwise, and clean it up. These were normally a few dollars, like two something a piece. They had them on sale for $1. I think I might go back tomorrow and get some more. Yeah, this is the cordless option. It takes 2 AA's. It's basically like a really tiny Dremel tool, but I don't know if I could change the tips on it. I gotta say, it's one of my new favorite tools to use. I can even use it on some of the extreme overhangs. I don't know, that's a good idea. It really eats away at the PET G without really melting it either. The key to that is really small circles. You don't want to just stay on one spot and melt it. Let me go back over it with some 80 grit as well. Just from the angle of printing, this was extreme overhang right here. This is the seam, so when it was printing, it was some of an angle like that. So all of this in here is a lot of overhang. But it did pretty well. I use a cooling fan at 100%. Just like you would with PLA. And seems to work pretty well. Hey, we got more people joining. All right. trying to decide, should I eventually do the rest of them this size because I have the rest of the Justice League, or should I do them all in the miniature size that they're supposed to be, which I started printing little guy. I don't know, maybe if I got a sponsor or something for the filament I could do them all in this size, but this was a lot of filament. I usually have to buy by the case anyways, but I don't know, maybe we could get the whole thing, the whole set done by the next Midwest rip wrap. So, some of you guys know, some of you guys don't. I do just my props for fun. I don't really sell props, but I do like teaching people how to do it right. So I thought about ways that I can try to make some money off it as I drop my sandpaper again here. There we go. So maybe I'll sell like Bad Wolf prop stuff as far as merchandise and whatnot. Alright, there we go. We're back onto the overhang. Build the brand, yes. Yeah, that Doctor Strange model I have is it's amazing. Who was the original artist for those? Do you remember, Ben? Sanix 3D, yeah, amazing, amazing models. If Sanix ever sees this, I have a few tips for you as far as the joining methods, but the models themselves are fantastic. Some of them are just a little bit tricky to print. This is a prime example. The little notches that connect everything, they overhang into nothing, so there is no way to do this without using support. And it makes it really interesting on the body section because there's some on the top and there's some on the bottom, so you have to use quite a bit of support. So if Sanix 3D ever wants to talk, I can help. I can help with your models, just in the joining, because your models are beautiful. So for anybody just joining, I'm using, instead of regular sandpaper, this is emery cloth. This is the same kind of stuff you would use if you were turning stuff on a metal lathe. It's a lot easier to work with over these surfaces. And it works really well, the 80 grit on PET G to clean it up. There's a lot more flex to it than normal sandpaper. I mean, it's a pretty tight spot, so I'm sorry I can't show it as easily here. I'm trying to see what I'm doing. I'm actually going to go back with my new tool here and get in these tight spaces and clean that up just a little bit more. You can go as little or as much on the finishing as you want. for me, you know, these little tiny spaces are probably never going to be seen by anybody, but I'm still going to clean them up. Dan, welcome. All right, I cleaned up quite a bit around that seam, and it's time to hit the rest of it with the glazing putty. I think it's pretty much ready. Country 3D, all right. Sorry if I've missed anybody's messages on there. Trying to glance up as I do this. I'm just spreading this on as thin as I can get it. Bondo brand glazing putty. It's the stuff you don't have to use an activator with it. It's already pre-mixed. So I'm just going over the seam as lightly as I can because I don't want to smush it down into the seam too much, because then it doesn't really fill it in. And you want to kind of blend it off to the side here, just like you would if you were doing drywall work. You got to feather it away from where you're working the main section. You want to make sure it's super thin too so that it dries really fast. And the section I did yesterday does need a little extra, so I'm going to go over that too. Pull it away from the main section. Feather it. There's a little crevice there I can't quite reach with my fingers, so I'm going to use just a little piece of emery cloth to shape it in there. Move around to the back side here. Again, I would be sorry if I don't quite get this in the camera shot because it's really hard for me to even see. Really tight space back in there. Is the added benefit of making the Hulk so large is I can fit my finger into some of these spots that would be really difficult a small model. And while I'm here, I'm also going to take care of that extreme overhang that I was sanding on and just coat it ever so lightly. We're just trying to fill it in just a little bit. Feather that away again. We're going to take most of that back off, and we might have to do a couple of rounds of it. I think that leg looks pretty decent for drying. I might do a little bit of the underside here after I do a little more sanding, but yep, that is glazing putty. I'll show it here as I put my cap on it. Bondo brand glazing putty. Glazing spot putty. Fantastic stuff. No mixing needed. So, as we got some new people in here, I'm going to do another seam that needs to be glued. I think I need to clean one up real quick first. So I'm going to go back to my 80 grit and go to another seam. you can see, I already did the midsection. And I'm going to do this arm here. I'm just going to clean it up as best I can with the 80 grit. I've already glued everything together once, but there's still a little gap, so we're going to do some gap filling on that. First, it needs to be nice and clean. As smooth as we can get her. So just some layers up here from where the top of the print finished up. And knock the little ridges down a little bit. I'm not going to try to take all the lines out, just the ridges themselves. This is kind of a hard spot to sand, so I'm going to switch back over to my little engraving tool. Knock that back down. You can actually use this on those extreme spots too and just go over it. If you ever do any fine detail work like lettering or just anything with small little grooves to get into, this works great. Just want to make nice little circles with it though. It does leave a bit of a rough surface, but if you're knocking down the real big stuff, that's alright because you're going to sand it anyways. That cleaned it up pretty good. Doing this streaming from my phone, and I actually put a tripod up. I just want to make sure we're good on battery. Yeah, it's plugged in, but I want to make sure that we are still fine. We're at 100%. This again is much easier with this emery cloth getting in here than the same grit of standard sandpaper. This doesn't conform nearly as well unless you really punch it up and all that, and then that tends to lose some of the grit off of it. This holds the grit much better. And if you're going to be doing a lot of sanding, get the emery cloth on a roll and just buy a roll of it. And for 3D printing, always start with the 80 grit, then move to the 220, 240 grit. In all my prop making, I've probably gone through big rolls of these things. Just about ready for gluing in the seams here. And I do always use glue in the seams rather than just mushing glazing putty in there. Just helps strengthen everything. tickling them under the armpit here. And then we're into some spots where it's hard to reach again. And here the mating surfaces didn't quite meet up properly, so I'm just going to take down the ledge a little bit on that. Just to feather it together. Let's make it a little more light there. And here again, as you can go as much or as little as you want. You know, not too many people are going to see underneath the armpit, but I'm going to still smooth it out the best I can. This is another pretty extreme overhang. I'm generally happy with that, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the gluing section for the seam. So back to our Gorilla Glue Super Glue gel. Just going to squeeze that into the seam as much as I can. I'll stop there because you do have limited work time with it. Move on to a piece of cardboard. I'm going to use the cardboard to get this as flat as I can and almost kind of mush it into the seam. You can actually press a little bit with this. I'm just trying to keep it from being globby. So as smooth as we can get her. Don't worry about getting excess on it as long as it's flat and smooth. That's all we care about. Now that it's on there, I'm going to go to my accelerant, which is baking soda powder, and just sprinkle it on. This is going to add some strength to it. All right. Let's see if I missed any of your messages here. I hate sanding. Yes, sanding is the worst part. I'm just catching up on your messages here because I was So initially I used super glue to glue it together, the same super glue gel, and it works really well. This has little prongs I can show you on the small version here that kind of hold it together. So there and there. They fit into little slots on the opposite side, so I just put the glue around the edges and then covered the slots where they meet. Then I glued them together with that, the super glue gel, and clamped it with my fingers as best I could for a while and just let her stay. So yeah, I do hate the sanding too. It's the long part, but the rewarding part is once you've actually painted everything and you get to do all the weathering. The weathering is the reward, so remember that. This is what you get to look forward to. Make it look old, dirty. So that's what I always tell people. I say, you know, the sanding does suck. It takes a long time, but it's worth it. It's worth it once you get past the sanding and the painting and you get to work on the weathering. Alright, so we have coated that with the powder, and it dries instantly. It's completely dry, and that's stronger than if I would have used like Zap-A-Gap or Instacure stuff, any of the solvent based. So I'm going to move around the rest of the seam here. The nice thing is too is that baking soda completely kills the smell rather than adding to it. Because the solvent-based stuff stinks. There's no nice way to say it. It just stinks. Alright, so I've put a little bit on there. And I'm going to use my cardboard again to smooth it out, make sure there's no rough edges, or no globs, I mean, on the edges here. No globs of any sort. Nice and smooth. There we go. And just to kill the smell even more, sometimes I will dip my cardboard into the baking soda powder so that I don't have to smell what I just wiped. Alright, so now we're going to sprinkle on again. Completely coat the glued sections. And use my cloth to kind of wipe them down. Get all the excess off of there. I think that's the entire seam. Yeah, it kills all the fumes because it cures it instantly. If you use Zap-A-Gap or any of those other ones, they do kill the super glue smell, but then they add the solvent smell that you have to deal with. Tastes the same with Sprite. I don't have Sprite in my can. Let's see. We can actually go back to one of these leg joints that we did a little earlier and sand off some of that. See how we did. So when I go over it now, I'm going to be switching to, this is 240 grit. And 240 is fantastic on the glazing putty. It works really well. So I got my 240 grit emery cloth. just going over the glazing putty that I put on there. And all that feathering that we did earlier really helped to make this go real quick. We are taking off most of it, so always remember to put it on as thin as you possibly can, but still cover up any of the imperfections. The glazing putty does have a bit of a smell to it, so when you're putting that on, you want at least some ventilation would help. I'm in a big basement that's got enough air movement down here. So here's the section that we had some extreme overhang that we had to fill in too. So I'm going to take that off carefully because we just want to barely see what was underneath the glazing putty, just very, very lightly. I'm going to use just a single layer here, and this stuff conforms really well to it. I don't know how much I'm going to get done tonight. There's just a lot of finishing work that goes into these. So maybe it'll probably be another night for the painting, and that way I can set up in the garage and do that for the like the filler primer and stuff like that. I don't know how many of you saw this. Here was a pretty extreme overhang, so there was some stuff to have to fill in. But I am going over it as light as I can with the sandpaper, just to get down where I can barely see the green popping through. Kind of a hard section to show you guys since I'm sanding back here, but try. If you see, it's the less emery cloth sometimes the better, because you don't have to worry about the excess flopping around on you. Let's see. Yeah, it was good to have you on here, Country. I'll definitely be posting more videos and more live streams as we go. This is the first official one to test out camera setups and things like that. And the Hulk is kind of my test subject for the whole thing. And once the Hulk is done, I will move on to Wally and finishing up the second eye. Anybody who was at Midwest Rep Rap got to see me working on and doing the first eye from start to finish. That took pretty much all day Friday after we got set up, and went on until at least midday on Saturday. The techniques here are going to be pretty much the same on Wally. You'll get to see the gluing section on Wally as well. And by gluing, I mean assembling of the pieces. This one was already assembled before the start of the video, but with the Wally eyes, this one's just taped together, so I'll have to completely disassemble it and show you start to finish. And that's always the goal, is to get rid of all these seams as best as we can. I know I've showed this at least once before, but you see how the seams are just gone. So hopefully we'll achieve that with all the seams on the Hulk too. Yeah, that was quite a while working on that one. Seeing a lot of familiar faces on the feed, so that's good. So a lot of people that I saw out at Midwest Rip Rap. And the goal for next year is to have Wally done and working for Rep Rap. Driving around, talking to people. Just say no to seams. Yeah, like that. My goal is always to make the seams disappear completely. R2 rocks, yes. Everybody loves R2. And if they don't, they're wrong. Never really intended to do live streams or videos or anything like that, but everybody kept asking me about my finishing processes and wanted to know how I did it, asked if they could see how I did it. So here we are. Curious how get along. Chopper is a bit of a prick. Yes, yes he is. See if I missed anybody's messages here. Ari playing with R2, that was awesome. That was a lot of fun, actually. That was a lot of fun. Fish are biting early in the morning. All right, good night, country. I've got my chopper started. I don't know how much of that I'm going to get done here before next Rep Rap, but I have started mine. I could turn the camera and show that off real quick. Let's see. It's actually right here. More lights back there, but there's my chopper frame. A little bit of the front panels there. Use this light. You can see there's a shoulder on him here. See, it's let's see if I can get my camera set back up how I was. And I got my light in the picture. There we go. 24 kilos for the full R2 print with Badley's files. I believe that. It's a lot of printing involved in that one. My R2 is not 100% printed, and I don't have any of Badley's files on mine, but I've got 146 printed parts on them. I'll give my arms a break from all this sanding for just a second, and we'll walk over to R2. Because why not? R2's awesome. Let's see if I can flip the camera and turn on the light. Hey, all right. Because I actually don't have any lights on in this area. Here's my R2. So all the detail pieces on mine are printed. So these here, the little bevels, arms. My arms are kind of special. They don't move, but if kids try to pry on them, they won't be able to break them because it's just held on with a magnet. Oh, those are printed. It's all printed there. But I helped develop a lot of those files with Matt Duncan, who's Cujo on the forums. And there was a few other people that contributed as well. There's a lot of files out there for R2 if you're doing the standard construction. Now Michael Badley has made files for the entire R2, and his parts are designed to fit together with his parts, obviously. The ones that we did are made to fit just basically the standard frames and things that were out there. All right, let's see if I can catch up on messages here. Okay. Yeah, that's a lot. So that was my R2. Let's see if we can adjust this thing. I bought a cheap little tripod stand at Walmart today. So I'm just trying it out. So far it's working all right. All right, hands are rested a bit. And we've gone around pretty much the whole seam on this one. And you can see where it's sanded, most of that material is gone. I can get the light on it. Most of that material is gone, and it's just a tiny, tiny layer of the glazing putty left. You can see the green through at most spots. And that's what we do to the entire thing anywhere you've put glazing putty. You try to get it to where it's just barely showing through the stuff underneath. And that's going to make for a nice smooth surface. So here we've got some more overhang issues. I don't know if you can really see that in the video. But that's another section to take the rough sandpaper to. I'm not even going to try to talk over that. I'm sure it's pretty loud. Okay, so I've knocked off all the roughness from the massive overhang that caused me some issues. You can see it's still not bad though. no strings hanging or anything like that. So I'm just going to take the glazing putty and kind of go over that whole section now. Glow in the dark in it, that would be cool. The little one that I've been doing is in a UV reactive. You can see too much of that. So here we are, just going to spread it as evenly and as thin as I can over the rough sections, and then slowly feather it out to the rest of it. And this stuff you want to move pretty quick with it. If you don't, it gets kind of hard to work with and ends up just being, I don't want to say gummy, but kind of. It almost rolls into little bits. So you can see it's now up to that point, especially when you get it thin, it cures really fast. So it's at that point now where it's done being worked. So I'm going to put a little bit extra on another section that was still a bit rough from the overhangs. Just to smooth that out. And I think I'll probably call that good for the night. Yeah, there's a massive hang here. Yeah. Thanks, Ben. He did. Thanks, Joe. I'll just touch up a few little spots that I can find as I go. Anything that's going to be a little bit hard to get smooth with sanding, sometimes you can just go ahead and smooth this in there ahead of time. If it's real bad. I'm just going to apply some of this and call that good for the evening. Let me know what you guys thought of the video so far. If there's anything you want to see more of, less of, anything like that. Any techniques you want to see in more detail. Obviously, I'll do the next one on the next part of the finishing process. Unless you guys want to see me just working more on the Hulk, I can do that too. As far as this this part of the process. Some of the pant lines here were really just a little hard to sand and kind of rough, so went ahead and spread that on there. It's just going to make finishing on that section a lot easier. Alright, so that's just part of the process. So next video we can do some more. I can show you how to do the filler primer in a video. We'll do the painting in a video. And maybe we can do one for the weathering and things like that. So thanks for showing up, guys, and watching. I'll let you know when I get ready to do another video. Alright, thanks. Bye, everybody. I gotta figure out how to turn it off, too.